An interview of Mr. George W. Lawn on 20 February 2001, Connecticut Street Armory, Buffalo. Interviewer is Lieutenant Colonel Robert von Hassel. Videographer is Mr. Michael Akey. Mr. Lawn, tell me where you were born and raised.
Okay, I was born in DuBois, Pennsylvania, and that was in 1920, and lived there in that town until the time of the war. And then when I went into the service, that was about the last time I really lived in DuBois. From that time on, I was either in college or working.
How did you come to be in the Navy?
Well, my dad was in the Navy in World War I, and when I graduated from high school in 1938, I had to go out and make a living for myself. I got a job here in Buffalo for a couple of months, and then come back to DuBois, and I worked in a locomotive repair shop. Now, that was steam locomotives in those days, and worked there for, I guess, about 18 months. And in 1941, when war was declared, I started making inquiries about getting into the Navy, because my dad was a Navy man, and I was going to be a Navy man. And I worked then until they inducted me in July.
July of which year?
That'd be July 1942.
42.
Yeah.
And what happened to you after that?
Well, I went into the service. I was taken to Buffalo, or to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then went up to Sampson. That's where I had my boot camp training. And I went in at 165 pounds and come out at 145 pounds. So obviously I'd been loafing around quite a bit. And after we left boot camp, my first assignment was, I think, it was in Hospital Corps School at Portsmouth, near Norfolk, Virginia. And I was there. I think that was a 6-week course. They were supposed to make us into corpsmen in 6 weeks, but halfway through I got sick and was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, so they had another run at it. And after the 6 weeks of training, plus the hospital time, I was sent to Jacksonville, Florida, and there's a naval hospital down there. And I was in that naval hospital for a while. I can't remember anymore how long that was, probably about 6 months, around there someplace. And then I was sent to Lake City, Florida. Lake City, Florida, at that time was 13,000 people. It was a little town, and we had the big air base outside of town. And it was just opening up, and they had a new dispensary, and I was one of the first guys in on that dispensary. So I was there for almost a year.
And your rating at this time was what?
Well, I went in as a hospital corpsman, I think it was called hospital apprentice. And then I became a fireman's mate 3rd class. I think it was a fireman's mate 3rd class by the time I got to Jacksonville. No, probably when I was a 3rd class when I was in Jacksonville, yeah. Boy, that was a long time ago. It really was.
So what kind of duties did you have at Jacksonville?
Jacksonville was kind of an interesting thing because it was a new hospital, and it was all long wooden buildings, all connected with overhead dog trot sort of place, you know. And I was a ward corpsman for the most part, but the ward I was in was an interesting one because the back end of it was called D ward, and D stood for dementia and determent, and it was where they kept the prisoners and the people who were mental cases and who were pretending to be mental cases, and that was fun. When you do the night duty, which I seem to be getting all too often, you carried a flashlight in one hand, a sandbag in the other, just in case. And a couple of times I had a little trouble, but it wasn't a very pleasant job. I didn't like that at all.
What kind of trouble?
The people try to grab you and pull you in and things like that. During the daytime, they had a Marine guard at that entrance, which was a gate. It was an iron gate. But at nighttime, the Marine wasn't there. I don't know whether he was afraid to be there or what. but anyway, you're on your own. I'll tell you a funny one, or not funny, but there was an enlisted man in there he was nothing but skin and bones, really. And he was tied down to a bed with a canvas sheet over him from his neck down, tied to the sides of the bed. And apparently he'd been very extreme in his behavior. And but we fed him and took care of him, you know. And he wasn't sick; he was just there. He was incarcerated, really. And one day I got some mail, and I was standing up at the window which led out into a field behind this particular building, and just looking at my mail and looking out there and not thinking of what I was supposed to be doing. And this guy had got out from his constraints. And I don't know how he did it, but he came up and he put his hands around my neck. Well, I almost did it right then, you know, but I didn't. And he must have said something, but I started talking to him, and I talked to him about the beautiful view he'd out there, and, you know, it wouldn't be nice to be out there, we could walk, and he just was going along with the flow of the conversation. I led him back to his bed, put him down, tied him down again. He's just like a little baby. And it scared the living out of me, though, for a little while, you know. So that was one of the experiences I had. That was Jacksonville. I was awful glad to leave that place.
Where did you go after Jacksonville?
Went to Lake City, Florida, and that was the Air Force base. They had the planes there were come down from Alaska. They were great big white things. I think they were called PBYs, but I might be mistaken on that. And their duty was to observe the Florida coast down through the Caribbean down and through there, and they'd come back to our base. And they were a dangerous ship because we had a lot of accidents. A lot of them cracked up, and as a corpsman, we had to go out and pick up the pieces. Never found a survivor. Every one of those planes that crashed, everybody died. Apparently they weren't one of the best airplanes that the government had.
And you recall what they looked like?
I think they're called PBY.
Were they amphibians or?
No, they were land-based.
Land-based?
Yeah.
Yeah. Painted white?
Painted white, yeah.
2-engine, 4-engine?
I'm having a hard time with that. I think they were a 2-engine plane, but I wouldn't want to swear to that. I wouldn't want to draw a picture of one of those things. I saw plenty of them then, but my memory of it is just gone.
Funny looking nose on them?
Can't remember. Yeah. They used to take guys down to Cuba. Cuba was a good place then. Used to take guys down to Cuba, and they used to bring back rum, and that was one of the trade-offs for staying in that place, I guess. But there was you don't want any real gory stories, do you?
I don't want to hear anything you want to talk about.
Well, the problem with being in that particular base was the need to go out when there had been a crash, and I can remember going to places where the poor guys had been in just were spread out all over the place, not their bodies, just them, pieces of them, and we'd try to gather it up. And I can remember, you know, showering and washing my hands for days at a time, trying to get the feel or the smell. I'm sure it wasn't the smell, but a feel of all that ugliness. And it was not very pleasant at all. But we thought we always would clear the place, and somebody would secure it and say, yeah, it's all right now, fellas. But we thought we did that all the time. At one time, a farmer came into the base and got past the Marine Guards and brought into our dispensary a human head, what was left of it. His pigs had rooted up. But apparently there had been a crash there, and that was it. And of course we didn't know who the devil it belonged to. They probably found out. I didn't know. It wasn't part of my job. But so it wasn't very nice there. But we stayed there. I was there for, well, till about, I think it was January 1944. I think I was there that long. And I did everything when I was there. We were it was a small base, and so you rotated around in surgery and in pharmacy and X-ray and everything, you know.
And mainly the base was Air Force?
It was an Air Force base, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were the pharmacy maid. We were the corpsmen, and our friends were all in the galley. And they cooked, and they kept us busy with, you know, stuff to eat, and we always made sure they had little privileges when we could give it to them, and we had a nice little thing going there, and that part of it was very nice.
But that didn't last. Where did you go after that?
Went to Norfolk. The day I landed in Norfolk, I found 10 cents for the cup of coffee and almost died, because it had been a nickel any place I'd been before that. That's where I got introduced to the 10-cent coffee. And Norfolk was just a stop-off place. I think it was there a day, and then they sent me over to a place called, it's a mine, what was it? Little Creek. Little Creek. Do you know about that?
Amphibious warfare.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's where I was. And that was a very interesting experience. That was for independent duty training. And we were all corpsmen. And there was a Quonset hut full of us, probably 20 or 30 guys, I can't remember. But I don't think the training was the best. We had a profusion of movies to watch, all of them having to do with, having always ended up with get to a doctor right away or call a medical officer or something of that sort, you know. Just we were teaching us to be independent duty, and then immediately saying, but you aren't really, you know, so they dump us into somebody else. But it was pretty good training, really. It gave you the one thing that you really needed to be on independent duty. That was a sense that you knew everything that was in the books. You know, you didn't, but it made you think you did.
You had a great sense of confidence when you were done with the
Yeah, you did. I think we all did. We thought we were the world's best. And things were different. When I was in Jacksonville. It was in Jacksonville, just to show you how things had changed. We had a patient there who, I can't remember what his diagnosis was, can't remember who he was, but the doctor who was making rounds saw this patient. He ordered intravenous infusion, and he turned to the nurse. There was always a nurse in charge of the corpsman, you know, and this nurse was a second lieutenant, and he told her that get this infusion ready, and he ordered it for the patient. And then the doctor left, and the nurse turned to me and she says, well, you better get busy on that infusion. And I said, I've never done anything like that. And she says, well, neither have I, so we're going to learn together. But she was a nurse, an officer in the Navy, and she had never done that. Of course, nurses today, and my wife is a nurse, I married a nurse, but they knew a lot more than that. They were, you know, very proficient people. But apparently the Navy was taking them in when the nurses of that day just didn't have that kind of authority. Mm-hmm. Doctor had to do it. See?
Now, once you were qualified for independent duty, where did they send you?
That was what we were doing at Little Creek.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then after Little Creek?
Then I was in transit. I was a couple of weeks over at Norfolk in a transit place, and then I got the word, and I was put on LST, and we took 21 days getting across to Naples. And in Naples where I got my own boat.
And which boat was that?
That was the YMS 24, Yard Minesweeper. And that was interesting too, because I showed up this one day to replace a fellow, I didn't know his name for many years, but can't remember anymore. But the day I showed up to assume my duties on that little minesweeper, I was met by the yeoman as soon as I got aboard, and he says, oh, we know you, your brother was here to see you. So my brother had been aboard my ship before I ever got there. He was in the Navy too. So that's how I got introduced to the boat. And a corpsman on a minesweeper really had a good job and really a wonderful situation, because he was the only one that really took care of there to take care of the guys, you know. And he also had a few part-time jobs or side jobs. One of them was to be the fellow that goes to the warehouses or whatever they called them and the distribution points at the places where we landed, and picked up personal gear and clothes and candy bars and smokes and et cetera and so forth. So that was your job, and you bring that back, and guys would pay you if everything cost very little, you know, that sort of situation from the PXs. So it was nice that way too.
Well, tell us a little bit about a YMS. That's a
Yard Minesweeper. Originally, the Yard Minesweeper was just that. It swept mines in close to shore. It was a small boat. It was, as I remember, it was 140 foot long and about 20 foot wide, and it was made out of wood. It was made out of wood because it had to sit high in the water, so it wouldn't kick off any contact mines. The mines were set low to catch the larger ships, and theoretically we could swim or float over them. And then they had a gadget in the front of the ship that gave out sounds which would trigger off the type of mines that responded to noise, which usually would be generated by the motors of a larger ship. So they had that had sweeping gear, which would float out to either side on buoys, be sort of a cutting cable, and it would catch the float would be down low, and then the cable would be down under the water, and it would cut the anchors of the mines that were floating there, you know. So that's the sort of job we did. And that's what the Yard Minesweeper was designed for. The Yard Minesweeper was the smallest of the minesweeping craft. There was another one called an AM, an auxiliary minesweeper, and then there was a third one above that, a larger ship. I don't know what they did.
MOS. my ocean-going minesweeper.
Okay, all right. Are you Navy, sir?
No, Army.
Oh, you know that. I'm glad. That's knows your stuff then. Fill me in what I miss up on.
How many men were in the crew?
I think the crew was supposed to be about 26. We had 30 men aboard our ship, I think. Well, I think, if you help me with the math, we had 16 and 13 and 5. How's that?
13, 16, and 5? That'd be,
26, 29, 34 guys,
four.
yeah.
Okay.
We had 13, we put 13 aboard the hospital ship, and 16 of us were Hale and Hardy, and we had 5 killed. So it was 34.
Now, this was in the Bay of Naples?
Yeah, that's where I picked up the ship in Naples. And the routine was usually out 4 days and in for a couple of days and get water and fuel and stuff like that, you know, and out 4 days, in 2 fuel days, out 4 and then 2. That was sort of the routine, but we went up and down the coast, and I have no idea why we were doing that, because we weren't sweeping mines. We would just be out there. And we went down as far as Oran, and I didn't really see any action except at Anzio, tail end days of Anzio, and we were in at Anzio, and the water would be flashing up on the ship, but we never had any real trouble. The one interesting thing about Anzio, though, was I think we were supposed to be paid twice a month, and the Army was once a month. Is that right? And anyway, we had one payday come while we were at Anzio, and damned if they didn't have a launch coming out from someplace or other. I can remember coming alongside with officers in white uniforms coming aboard to pay us. And here we are in the Bay of Anzio with shells flying all over. It's kind of funny. But the guys had poker games and whatnot. And when you're in a situation like that, they'd do anything to gamble, I guess. It's one thing that guys were doing no matter where you were, I guess. But that was the only place I really saw any action until after the invasion.
So what was life like on a small boat like that?
Everybody knew everyone else, and I was a corpsman, so I was the only one there. It didn't have any other people in that particular capacity, and it caused, you know, you had to be careful for one thing. We had alcohol, and alcohol was always something that people longed for, so I marked my alcohol in the cabinet with a code name. What did I call it? Can't remember now, and nobody ever caught on, so that was, because they used to do things, you know, the alcohol was always we got beer from the States one time. That was interesting. I don't know how we got it, and I don't know where we were, but we got a case of beer, maybe a couple of cases, and everybody was getting a bottle. And I remember this one guy had a bottle of beer, and he said, well, I don't drink, and I don't like people who drink, and I think it's a sin or something like that. And he took his bottle and heaved it over the side, and no sooner left his finger than some guy came to him, throwing away a bottle of beer. That was a sin. We had competition in some directions. We had a couple of pet monkeys aboard, and apparently that was all right. Nobody seemed to bother about that. We got a crate of eggs one time, and they were on board sitting there someplace, and got up the next morning, and the eggs were all over the deck. And we found out what had happened is one of the monkeys had discovered the eggs, and he would crack open the eggs and dump the contents on the deck and pick that inside membrane from the shell, the inside of the shell, and that's what he was eating. So the rest of the egg was on the deck, and that was kind of a mess. It was an awful mess to clean up, and I don't know which one of the guys it was. I'm glad I don't, but he picked up the monkey and threw it over the board as far as he could. That was the end of the monkey. He just disappeared. But well, he was stealing those eggs. The eggs weren't very good anyway. But they got powdered eggs, which I'd never seen before, because I used to do a lot of camping before the war, and I'd never seen powdered eggs. But the powdered eggs that the Navy had was kind of a green color. And in those days, they make a pretty good powdered egg nowadays, but not in those days. It didn't. It was pretty nasty stuff. Yeah, but the life for a pharmacist mate was nice, because you had the respect of the guys. They always knew that they could come to you for one thing or another, and I became sort of a father confessor to some of these younger guys. I was probably 22 then. Some of the boys were much younger. And of course, they didn't always want to comply with the rules and regulations because I had to give them shots. And I can remember chasing around the deck just for everybody else's fun, just thinking it was hilarious. And I just went along with it too to add to the fun, chasing somebody who just didn't want a shot. And you finally have to catch up with them and give them a shot. So we had some fun aboard.
Now, did you spend much time ashore among the Italians?
When we were at Naples, and just before before we left on that invasion, we were taking turns, 2 at a time, to go up to Rome, to see Rome. Rome was the attraction everybody wanted to see. And I was on the list to leave in the next couple of days, and I missed it. So I always felt kind of sad about that. But I did see Pompeii, and seeing Pompeii was an interesting thing, because I had a friend who was his name was Bowling, Ray Bowling, and he was a foreign mate on another LST, or another YMS. And he and I decided to just go for a sightseeing tour one time, and we hitched a ride out an Army truck, and we were riding along, and we saw the sign saying Pompeii or Herculaneum, or one of the signs, I forget which was. So we just jumped off, and that's the way we saw Pompeii. So we went back another time too, just to see it, because that was the nicest thing I ever saw as far as travel and sightseeing and whatnot. Seeing Pompeii was really an experience, and I'll never forget it, and always appreciate the fact I had that opportunity. But getting off the ship and visiting around, I enjoyed that. I think I made pretty good use of my free time that I did have. In Pompeii, I don't know whether, yeah, it was Ray Bowling that time too. He was a farmer's mate on another YMS, so we'd meet. And he and I went out to the edge of town and started to walk up to a shrine up on top of Mount Pellegrino, I think it was, yeah, Mount Pellegrino, outside of Palermo. And that was a wonderful experience. It was an old Roman road that used to zigzag up the mountain like this. And that was interesting, but about halfway up we heard some music, some singing, and we stopped and tried to find it, and sure enough, way down over the hill there were people harvesting wheat, I guess it was, and they were in a what is that where one just follows the other, but off to the side. There's a name for that, and my mind's
Offset?
Yeah, offset each time, and they were using their sides and singing at the same time. You never find that in America. You know, American farmers don't do that, but they do in Italy, and it was just a magnificent demonstration of pastoral beauty. You know, those farmer people just doing the thing they do and doing it in rhythm all the same and singing at the same time, and we just stayed there and watched it for a while. Then we went on up the top, and sure enough, there was a shrine up there. There was a story connected with it. The local fishermen went out, and their ship was sinking or something, and all prayed to the Virgin, and they were saved, and so they had to do something to show their appreciation, and they carried a great big anchor, and it was ensconced in the middle of the shrine, you know, the huge thing, and that must have been a nice job carrying it up, but apparently they all carried it up. That was the way they said thank you. So that was an interesting experience. I enjoyed that. Mm-hmm.
Well, take us forward now. You're in the Bay of Naples, the Anzio, tail end of Anzio.
Yeah.
Then what?
Well, there was a lot of talk about that time where the other end of the pincher was going to be. The Normandy thing was going to happen. We didn't know that, of course. Interesting thing about that little ship there, if there was a radio, it was probably in the wardroom, and we didn't know, at least I didn't know anything that was going on, because Normandy I didn't know about. But the scuttlebutt was that there was going to be an invasion of southern France, because there's a planned invasion of northern France. We didn't know anything about when it was going to happen. And I think I remember that there was something about the June 6th invasion, but it came as an afterfact, you know, just sort of incidental. And we were getting ready for this invasion. The big question was, where's it going to be? Was it going to be were they going to go up the east side of the boot, or were they going up the west side of the boot to make that sweep? And it soon became evident that it was going to be on up towards Leghorn, because the area just became, every morning there were more ships out there. Golly, I don't know how many ships they finally had there. And while we were congregating, we were sent back to, I don't know where it was, Salerno, or maybe further south, and did some practice sweeps and practice with some landings, some temporary practice landings, and that was kind of what we didn't know what was going to happen. It looked like everybody didn't know what they were doing, like no one knew what they were doing. We were all going, what the hell is all this about? We've already taken Italy, why are we doing this? But they were practice situations. And then finally one day we took off in this huge armada, but it was very, very slow going. I think that's the time we had I'm not sure if that was the time, but we had a dust storm while we were passing through the Straits of Bonifacio. I think that's the way it's pronounced. It's the channel between Corsica and Sardinia. And we had a hard time getting rid of the sand flies that came with the sand. And they had a couple of those little, I suppose it's DTT or something. They were little bombs. We had to stay out on deck until the bombs cleared the below decks first, because we were so full of these little ants flying all over the place. And I'm not sure if that was on the same trip. We did that once, but I'm not sure if it was the same time. But anyway, we were heading north, and we had one emergency aboard the ship while we were in that last leg, and that was, we had our executive officer was a Hollywood movie star, John Howard. I don't know whether you remember John Howard or not. Anybody remember John Howard? He was the younger brother in that movie, Lost Horizon. And he played the younger brother in Philadelphia Story, and then he had been in other B pictures, and after the war he never did make it again. He joined the Navy and gave up his Hollywood name and took his real name, which is John Cox. So he went through the war as John Cox. Nobody knew he was a movie star except the guys that happened to be with him. But he passed a kidney stone while we were on the way to southern France, and he had a heck of a time. He was screaming bloody murder, and I had to keep him sedated with morphine. And some of the guys thought he was an awful big sissy for not, But I've had a kidney stone. I know what it's like, and I'm telling you, he had every right to scream. But that's 3 or 4 days later is when we really had to be the men we were supposed to be, and he was. He did a marvelous job. He was a real hero there, and he got the Navy Cross for it. Yeah. But anyway, we went up that way, and then we were sweeping around the Bay of Frejus, just off the coast of France. The town in there was San Rafael. You can see it on the map. I've looked at it a good many times. You could see during the daytime. You could see what the Allies were doing. We were sweeping mines, and we were backed up by a lot of smaller war vessels like destroyers and whatnot. But in back of them are these huge monsters, and the U.S. Texas was one of them. And I was glad to see the U.S. Texas, because my dad had told me about the Texas. He had admired the Texas in World War I, and here it was in World War II. And those big, I think they were 14 inches, go sailing over us, and they make a noise like a freight train going over the. Yeah, but they were about 2 days of bombarding the coast, and I don't think we saw any sign of life over there until the second day, and then all of a sudden their batteries opened up and they were fighting back again. They'd just been underground and taken it, but apparently surviving. And it went on that way for about 2 days, and then that second day they brought in the Air Corps, and the planes would go over and drop, God, they must have dropped millions of tons of stuff. It just looked like the whole country was going up in smoke. and we could feel the blast against our pants, and I don't know how far away we were, but it was within sweeping distance, so a couple of miles, I suppose, around there. I don't know, but it was an experience to realize all that stuff going up, and the smoke and the fire and everything. But we didn't really get involved into any trouble until the night of the 15th. I know it had to be the 15th because the 16th is the big day. And we were chased out of the bay because they started to fire at us. And the whole flotilla, there were 6 or 8 little boats. We just turned and hightailed it out of there as fast as we could. And then the next day was the day that they actually decided to hit the beach, and that's when we got sunk. You want to know about that? We were sweeping parallel with the coast, and apparently the British had some sweepers too, and they had gone in and were supposedly had swept that whole area. We were going in just to make sure it was clean, and all of a sudden we started hitting these mines. So apparently that wasn't true at all. I think we had 2 or 3 of them before we finally hit the one that really put us out of commission. And that was a terrible explosion. My personal story there, which I've written about, and you may have seen that. But I was supposed to be up on the bridge with the captain. I think at 12 o'clock. I've written that down, but I've forgotten it. But anyway, I was supposed to be up there to stand. I think it was a 12 to 2 watch, and but I had been on during the night, and I was sleeping in. And one of my friends, a fellow named Murphy, said, "Well, take it easy. Go ahead and get yourself a coffee, and I'll stand by for you." So he went up, and he was in my spot. And I finally, shook myself loose and was up and had a cup of coffee, said hello to a few guys, and started up to the bridge and got up the pyrotech deck, and that's the wheelhouse there. And I went into the wheelhouse. Opened the door and just walked in, and as I was walking in, that's when we hit the mine. And, I just thrown in, and everybody in there was just in a mess, God, that was a tremendous explosion. It took the forward third of our ship and just lifted it off and disappeared. We had a 3-inch gun on the bow, and that gun disappeared. Nobody ever saw that. We had a couple of guys who disappeared too, and both of them come back. One of them came back unskinned, except that he lost all his clothes. But the anchor chain and how that happened, I don't know. But the anchor chain went flying up in the air, and it came across the bridge, and that's where the captain was. He was there with another enlisted man, and it just cut him in half. So he was #1 man, and he was out of the picture altogether. But I was in the pilot house right underneath. He was right above me, just the deck between us, and get bouncing around, and one of the guys was thrown against me, and when the water stopped coming down, I thought we were underwater. I thought we were down under. I thought we'd sunk. It was just a first reaction before you had a chance to even think, but just a wall of water coming down all around you. And this guy was banging up against me, I guess. But anyway, when we stopped enough so we can see what was going on, pitching and bouncing all over the place, I tried to pick him up, and another guy helped me. And I thought we were underwater or sinking, so we threw him overboard. Figured it'd be safer overboard than any place. Well, he never did survive. He was just banged up terribly. He died the next evening in the hospital ship. But the other guy that was in there with us, he was just a little fellow, and tougher than nails though. But he thought we were underwater too, so he jumped off. He jumped overboard. He just jumped overboard to get away from the sinking ship, and he couldn't swim. We laughed about this afterward because he had never gone water with us, but he swam. He did. He just swam back to the ship, crawled back on board again. But from then on, it was complete chaos. One of the first things I did was go up on the bridge because I must have had sense that the captain was up there. And of course, he was dead. One of the other officers up there having an emotional time. They were very good friends, and he was having a bad time. He was screaming and hollering. And there's another guy all banged up there, and we tried to take care of him. There had been another fellow up in the crow's nest, and he had, I don't know whether he'd just come down or came down while I was there or not, but anyway, he was all banged up. So then it was, from that time on, it was just taking care of people and for a couple of hours. But it was crazy because there was mines all around, and some of the guys were standing there just hoping to see a mine, so they pushed it away with what was left of something, whatever, an ore or something. We had a British motor launch come alongside to do what they could to help us, and we were trying to get people to cross over, and one of the guys, one of the worst, this Murphy fellow I mentioned before, we had got him in a basket cage stretchers. They used in the Navy in those days. I don't think they have them anymore. And they were passing him over to that little ML, and it was hit by a mine. So the mines were just all over hell, and it was exploded and threw all sorts of stuff up on us. I crawled under the shield on I think it was a 20 millimeter, maybe a 50 millimeter, 50 caliber. Anyway, we had a gun mounted on the stern, and I can remember being under that and having everything coming down on that and thanking my God I had something there to protect me. And but then trying to get those fellows that were already on that ship, which was already getting ready to sink, and our own crew, you can see the confusion that must have reigned. And then we started getting help. There's one guy come over, one of the farmers mates from one of the other YMSs who knew me, come over in a rowboat, just come over to see if he could help out. And I never did get in touch with that guy. Different times I'd feel some regret that I had. I hope he made out well. And then another YMS came along, but the mines were so thick around there that they took on as many as they could, and then they got the heck out again because it was just, it was too dangerous. But finally, we got aboard that was there another one? I'm not sure. Anyway, I was aboard another YMS, and we went over to the AM, which the larger Minesweeper, and that was a friend of ours because the ARC skipper, who was now dead, had been the executive officer on that boat, and his captain knew the guy, and he realized what had happened. He wanted to help us out, so that was the first place we landed. Then later on we got on an LST or something and took us down to Naples. So that was the end of that. That was only a very, and the Southern France invasion was not the biggest war and the biggest fight in the battle in the war, but it was our war, and it was it's one we were interested in. I don't know whatever happened.
Tape 2, interview with Mr. George W. Lawn, 20 February 2001. Mr. Lawn, we were talking about the invasion of southern France and the mine that blew up, the Minesweeper you were on. So eventually you got off the Minesweeper?
Well, we got off the Minesweeper, and I was banged up quite a bit, and I can remember there's two interesting things there, because we lost a couple of guys we couldn't find, and one of them was the steward's mate. There's only one steward's mate aboard that ship. He's a black guy, of course. That was the only rate that black people could have in those days. And he was in the John, which was way up in the bow, and when the forward third of the ship went up, that was the end of poor Andy. Andy Cox was his name. And we had him and a fellow named Rising that we didn't know where they were. So I think it was Mr. Cox and I think it was, went ashore to see with the registration, Graves registration from the Army was supposedly doing these things too. Went ashore to see whether we could find what had happened to our guys, and we couldn't find anything. We stayed there for a couple of hours, I think, and then come back again. And I think I was still in pretty good shape then, but I could become pretty crippled up. When I was getting banged up, I was just banged up. And somewhere along the line, I think it must have been on the LST, I couldn't go up the Jacob's ladder. I couldn't use my knees well enough, so they had to haul me. Another fellow and I, they lifted us up on one of those big cargo nets. So anyway, we were on the LST, and they took us back to Naples, and we were at a rec place down there, a recreation place, and for a few days and gave us a chance to go over and see our buddies who had been put on it was a Chateau Thierry, it was a hospital ship. Mm-hmm. And we went over to the Army hospital there and met them, and one of them had died, but the rest were, you know, glad to see us. We were glad to see them. And then they sent us down to Bizerti, and we were in Bizerti for a while, and our officers left us. They went back to the States, and finally we were discharged from there, and took a. I remember we laughed about it. It took a land-based plane flying over. No, it took a sea-based plane going over the land to Spain and Portugal. We landed in Portugal, then they put us on a land-based plane that sent us over to Bermuda. That's the way it was. And in Bermuda, we had the first the fresh milk and stuff like that some of the guys were really waiting for. Some of those fellows have been aboard for a good long time, over a year. Mm-hmm. I was one of the newest ones. We had one guy younger than me, and he got injured before we had the invasion. He was standing on the deck 2 nights before, and these cables that stretch out there for to the floats, in which were supposed to cut the anchors of the mines, would go up and down like this. It just vibrates something awful, and he got too close to one of them, and something happened, and it flew up and hit him in the shin. So I had to take care of him in blackout conditions. The door opened, the lights all go out, and he had his teeth all knocked out, and his jaw, I think his jaw was broken. Anyway, I had to patch him up. I had to do some suturing. So that was hard, because it was in the dark, then light, and it was hotter than Hades, because all the lights and everything are turned off, including the air conditioning, if we had anything. I don't know what it was, but anyway, it was awful damn hot that night. But anyway, we're back in Naples, down into Bizerti, flying up to Portugal, then over to Bermuda. I'm pretty sure it's Bermuda. Then we went on up to Anacostia, and I remember flying into the air base there. We'd never heard of jet planes. None of us had ever seen or heard of a jet plane. And all around here we are in this great big lumbering, probably a DC-3 or something like that. And all these little planes zipping around all over the place. And that was really something. We had never dreamed of anything like that, because they were going like bats out of hell, you know. And we were very excited about that, and excited to be home. And I think we had a day there getting clothes. I remember laughing among ourselves about we all looked like boot campers, because we had the clothes were pressed the wrong side out, and the hats, you know, had nobody ever worn them before. We looked like real boots. And then I was home for 30 days, and we call it survivor's leave, I guess. Mm-hmm. But my mother, that was interesting. My mother didn't know where I was, of course, and we weren't allowed to talk about what we had been doing. But the woman next door to us had heard on the radio that my ship had been sunk. And she told her husband, and they decided to keep quiet and not tell my mother. And when I got home, and there I was, it was a big surprise to them. They were all very happy. But the neighbors knew about my ship sinking before my family did, and I told them. And didn't tell anybody else, because it still wasn't. We were still under orders not to talk about it. So that's kind of crazy, yeah. But it was 30 days at home, and meeting my old friends for a while, being a little bit of a hero. So, but when we went back, we went back to Anacostia again, and kind of all got together. It was kind of a nice reunion. We had some liberties together for a while. We were probably there a couple of weeks as my memory serves me right. Then I was sent to Solomon's Island, Maryland. Are you familiar with Solomon's Island?
Oh yeah, a long time ago.
Well, that was the nearest Liberty place was Washington, and to get Liberty, you had to go standing up in a sort of a cattle car trailer to get up there. That wasn't very nice. It wasn't a very nice place to be at all. I didn't like Solomon's Island, Maryland. I had a job there. I was anyway, because I could type, I guess. I was an assistant to and I can't remember his name, but he was a venereal disease control officer for that whole area. So that was my job there. That was interesting, reading all those darn reports. But we lived in Quonset huts. It was a temporary arrangement. And I was there for, I don't know how long, but eventually I was sent to Quantico, where, to be with the guys just coming back from the 1st Marine Division, coming back from the Pacific. They were all older fellows. They were older guys. They were in their 40s, and I was a Navy guy, and they didn't know what to think of me at first, because I was just, I guess, as the first guy that's ever actually with them in a base, you know, behind the lines, I guess. And but we got along pretty well after I got used to them, and they got used to me, and we used to go on liberties together. But Quantico was one of those places that liberty was restricted. Nobody's allowed back on base after 8 o'clock at night, I think it was. We had to go off and come back real early. It was not the nicest place to leave for a liberty. And I don't know where we used to go. There was a town there, though. And that's where I was when the war ended. So I was shipped out of there to Sampson. I was discharged from Sampson.
Well, what happened to you after the war?
Well, when I was working when I was a boy, I was an Eagle Scout, and I was great in for camping and things of that nature. And I wanted to be a forester. And even when I was just out of high school, I remember I made some inquiries about, I thought maybe I'd get a correspondence course. In my culture, in DuBois, Pennsylvania, in those days, nobody I knew had ever gone to college except one guy. His name was Tom Carney, and he'd got a basketball scholarship. That's the only fellow I ever knew that had been to college. So I wanted to be a forester, and I knew that was college, and I'd written some letters and wrote to Cornell, I remember. And then I found a forester who lived up in Penfield, Pennsylvania, and I visited him one time, and he gave me some books, and that almost changed my mind. I changed my mind, but that wasn't the real reason. Books he gave me were about laying telephone lines and things like that, which I didn't think that was my idea of being a forester. I had a more glamorous view of forestry then. But that didn't deter me, and I still wanted to be a forester. But when I come out of the Navy, the idea of forestry just disappeared completely. I'm no longer interested at all. I had been in the hospital corps and doing things in hospitals and the stuff that I just told you about, and I wanted to continue with that. And on one of the bases in Lake City, I had, in my routine there, I had worked with physical therapy, and that was all machines. We weren't into sports medicine or anything like that, but shortwave diathermy and infrared and ultraviolet, stuff like that. I thought that'd be interesting, so I decided that's what I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. So home from the service, I took a couple of English courses at the local high school and started making arrangements to go to school, and went to the University of Pennsylvania. And spent 2 years there and looked into the physical therapy program. Wasn't too keen on that, so I transferred to Columbia, where I talked to some people up there and thought I'd like that better, so that's where I went.
Columbia?
Columbia. Mm-hmm.
For physical therapy?
Physical therapy. Mm-hmm.
And is that what you worked in after college?
Yeah, so that's where I went after college. There, 2 years at Penn and 2 years at Columbia, and got my bachelor's degree there, and then went to work at the Institute of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in New York City. That was headed by a man named Howard Rusk. Now, did you know about Howard Rusk? He was the man who developed the whole idea of ambulatory care in the Army. He was really a great salesperson, and he sold the whole idea of early care and getting people up and going to get back to work again right away. So he had this big institute in New York, and it was probably the most famous one in the country. In fact, I'm sure it was. The patients we had there came from all over the world. Crowned heads of state, as they say. And I worked there for a year, and then one of the men in training there for physical medicine and rehabilitation was a man named Morelowitz, and he asked me to go to University of Buffalo with him, so I did. And I went up there, and I was the first physical therapist at the University of Buffalo, and set up the physical therapy school, and taught a little bit, but I didn't like the idea of university life. So in the meantime, I got married. My wife and I decided we'd rather go someplace else. Tried to find a place that we could go. Actually, we tried to find this place down in the Southwest, because she's from Texas. We thought we could live down there, and I was perfectly happy to do that. but we couldn't find anything, so I ended up in Jamestown, New York. And that's where I finished up my days. I worked there at the hospital for about 35 years, had a private practice too, and then retired in 1984 and went to work as a consultant in industry, teaching people how to avoid back injuries, and did that for another 10 years, and then really retired. I've been retired since then.
And what do you do? What do you do nowadays?
What do we do now? Oh, I do a little writing and reading and chasing around looking for my kids. We have 9 kids, so we visit them a lot, and we did a lot of traveling since I retired. Been all over the world, I guess. Retirement's been nice for me.
Good. Sounds like it. Let me go back and ask you a couple of questions. You'd mentioned your executive officer on the Minesweeper got the Navy Cross.
Mm-hmm.
Was that as a result of the sinking?
Yeah. He's the guy that had the passed this kidney stone too, you remember?
Mm-hmm.
And he did several things. First, he did the thing which an officer had to do. As soon as he found out that the captain was dead, he assumed command, and he destroyed what equipment we had and all the papers we had. He did that. Some of the fellows said that he just went through everything, sunk a lot of it, just threw it overboard. And then when one of the guys was tossed into the water when the ML went up, he dived in and pulled him aboard again. So he actually saved a man's life, and he got the Navy Cross for that. So we were all very glad to hear that. He was a great guy. All those officers were really. The skipper, Sam Pruitt, was a sports writer in a Birmingham paper as a civilian. And his executive was John Cox. He was a movie actor. The communications officer was Eugene Sullivan. He was a lawyer, a young lawyer. And what was Waller's job? Sullivan was the engineering officer. And the communications officer was Bob Waller. Bob Waller was a psychologist. So none of these guys were trained to be Navy people, and aboard ship they were all professional people. And I guess the crew was too. They ran the whole gamut of different kind of jobs they'd had before. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But considering that they all came from different lives, did they seem to pull together?
Yeah, they did. But they had their hang-ups too. The skipper had a hang-up. He liked people, and we used to have to go out and do these practice sweeps and whatnot. And one of the times we were out there, and there was an admiral in the vicinity, and he was observing. That was his job, I suppose. But whenever we'd come in, we'd always have to get into our whites to stand on board ship and salute as we went past the admiral's ship. That was the way you do things. And this one time we come in, and the chief motor mac, he was their chief petty officer, named Varney, and he went to Captain Pruitt and asked if just this once, it's been a hot day and everybody had been working real hard, just this once could the guys stand the watch in their dungarees. And he got permission to do that. So we did. We stood at attention, but we didn't have our whites on. And when we landed, there was a message from the admiral's ship, and telling the skipper for our boat to come over and see him. And he didn't tell us, but later on, one of the other officers, I suppose it was John Cox, he was the closest to the rest of us, said that he had been restricted aboard ship for so many hours, and I forget what it was now, but he was punished for letting the guys stand in their dungarees instead of their whites. Navy discipline, you know. Cox, the movie star, was it was his job, you know. The people who are movie stars are exhibitionists to begin with. And he liked people. Every night we'd have fellows around, he'd be telling us stories, and he could be, you know, he'd never lost our respect for him. He was still Mr. Cox, and he got saluted just like everybody else, and everybody loved him, but he was still a man that we had to respect. We did, yeah. Eugene Sullivan was a guy who had written a book about a sports figure who has been a coach, I think it was, or a trainer at Notre Dame. So he was a sports nut aboard ship, and he talked about sports all the time. Wilder was a psychologist. He and I had troubles together. we were good friends. We kept in touch for a couple of years afterwards, but we had a lot in common. He came from Philadelphia. He came from Portland, New York originally, but he lived in Philadelphia, and he was the guy who had to go ashore all the time and do things at the official level. I had to go ashore to get small stores, and sometimes we argued over that. He came aboard one time with some meat, and I came aboard with a big head and a full belly, and I wasn't in my best mood, I guess. But he put the meat in the head next to the John, and in my position as the sanitary officer aboard ship, I took him to task, and he admitted it is wrong. So, and I said, you got to get rid of that stuff, and he did. We put it ashore, and I don't know whether I was doing this deliberately or not, but we put it out on the dock, and my God, there must have been 20 natives hit it right away. And it was in Naples. They needed that meat. The first time I saw Naples, when we were docking for the very first time, there was a big can on that dock there, and a bunch of people around fighting over what the Navy fellows had just dumped in there, which was chicken legs. And they were fighting these legs. You see the guys carrying hands full of chicken legs. You know, they were hungry, and that left quite an impression. From that time on, it left a real impression on me. So anyway, I guess maybe that was behind making sure the meat got off in the dock, but I don't know, maybe not.
What do you remember about when you were at Sampson? What was life like at Sampson?
At Sampson, just there long enough to get out. But what I remember, really, the only thing I remember is that pharmacist mate was that I had to be checked out by a lot of other pharmacist mates, and they were black. And there were no pharmacist mates in black in my experience before that. They were new wave of the Navy had opened up its ranks to black people.
Now that was at the end of the war when you were discharged.
That's right, 1946.
What about when you first came in and you were sent to Sampson? What was life like there?
When I first came in, and I was in Newport. I wasn't in Sampson. I was discharged from Sampson, but I went in. Boot camp was up in Newport. Newport was interesting because I checked with my dad. Of course, I got in touch with him right away, and I was in the same big building that he had been in World War I for boot camp.
Same
yeah,
building?
just by coincidence. Yeah, yeah. And that was, like I say, I lost 20 pounds there. They put us to work. All sorts of athletics and whatnot, some jiu-jitsu and march like mad. We would march in the middle of the night when some of the guys got into trouble for, one of the guys cut we slept in hammocks, so one of the guys cut a hammock at one end and top of it fell onto the floor, and the people on watch saw it, and they turned on the lights and raised hell, and so we all had to get up and get dressed and get full bags and go march for a couple of miles and come back again before we go to bed. So we were learning discipline, and one of the athletic events was the whole company, and I think 150 men in the company, or maybe it was just 50. It seemed to me it was 150. And we had to push that ball over a line. You may remember something like that. That was God dang, you stupid kids out there trying to work that damn thing. If I'd known any better, I'd just sat back there and let other people do it. But somehow or other, you had to go in there and do it. You know? Teaching us how to do the job. Yeah, it worked. But we were there 6 weeks, I think. Yeah.
Now, looking back after all these years now, what stays with you the most about your time during World War II? What sticks out the most or stays with you the most in your mind about your time in World War II?
Oh, I think the invasion, what happened there, was not the most pleasant, but it stayed with me longer, and I find myself thinking about it. I had a lot of guilt for a while. The fellow that I threw over the side, who died eventually, had I been better diagnostician in the first seconds of the explosion, maybe I'd have kept him aboard. He may have lived, you know. So that did bother me for a long time. But it did go away. I don't have any guilt anymore. I forgive myself a long time ago. But it did bother me for a while. What else? That was the one thing that stands out mostly. As far as fun and games, Liberties in Washington, D.C., I suppose, that was fun. That was just a short time, but I enjoyed it.
Were you proud of what you did in the Navy?
I'm sorry?
Are you proud of what you did in the Navy?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, my two brothers are in the Navy too, so my dad and three of his sons were in the Navy, so that was nice. My youngest brother, or not, he wasn't the youngest, still another one, he was a maverick. He joined the Air Force, but that was for the Kuwait fracas. But Jim, when he joined the Navy, he was still in high school, and I don't know whether that was a routine or whether it was something special. But anyway, he didn't graduate, so my dad got his diploma. He went up on the stage and got his diploma for his son who was graduating. I think other people did that too at that time.
Do you feel it changed your life at all?
Oh, sure, yeah, heavens yes. I wouldn't have met the woman I married, had met for the service, because I became a physical therapist, and that's how much, she's a nurse, I'm a PT, we met, and clicked. But the big change was in my aspirations for a while. There I was working in a machinist job, and I didn't like that at all. It was dirty work, and you know, my dad was a boilermaker in a railroad repair shop, and I didn't like his life, and he didn't like his life, so I didn't aspire to that at all. And it wasn't particularly a good job. I was making 35 cents an hour when the war broke out. But I hope to be a forester. So yes, did it change my life? Absolutely, and for the better. I don't think I'd like to be a forester today.
Well, we're coming down towards the end. Do you have any last thoughts? Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's all. You did a good job of pulling it out of me.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.